make sure that's working. Yes, all right, how close I need to be. I'm Jen Gaudry. I'm the National Director of the Residuals Claims Department.
Valery, Kotik. I'm the National Director of the Residuals Processing Trust and Estates area.
So let's just dive right in. Hopefully I know how to work the remote. All right, what are residuals? It seems a little bit odd that right underneath that I have a big banner that says original compensation. But that is because to get to residuals, first you have to know what your original compensation actually covered. And under our contracts, that can mean any myriad of things. So if you are working on a theatrical motion picture of any budget level, a regular theatrical, low budget modified, ultra low, whatever the case may be, your initial compensation is going to cover theatrical exhibition worldwide in perpetuity. So let's say you worked on Grease back in the 70s and then they re-released it, I don't know, how long ago was that now, 10 years ago? Still covered by original compensation. Or for like Rocky Horror Picture Show, it's in theaters all the time. Theatrical exhibition in perpetuity for theatrical motion pictures. In television, it runs the gamut. If you work on a network primetime show, your original compensation gets one run on network primetime, unless there's some advance pay in there. If it's a made-for-pay, they'll get 10 exhibition days, meaning they can show it as many times as they want in a 24-hour period over 1 year. So you have a big range. If it's a made-for-DVD, they get 100,000 units plus 10 days on pay TV. It's a big range. So step one is understanding what your original compensation covers. And then residuals is additional compensation when it gets distributed or exhibited somewhere beyond what that initial comp covered. So like I said, that can be triggered sooner, later, never. It just kind of depends on the nature of the work you did and the contract it was signed to. So we have two types of residuals. Fixed residuals are calculated based on how a performer was engaged or paid, and they're tied to a specific type of exhibition. So think television. That's the only place these types of residuals exist. So when you have a made-for-television program that airs in a network, it reruns, you're going to look at how the performer was paid in order to determine the residuals that are due. The other type are revenue-based residuals or gross receipts-based. These are tied to revenue that's being generated from a distribution agreement, a license agreement, and it's not necessarily tied to a specific number of exhibitions. So let me give you an example. If you're on a made-for-basic cable show, when it reruns in basic cable, you're going to get a percentage of scale every time it reruns, assuming it's signed to a current basic cable agreement. So a percentage of scale every time it reruns. That's a fixed, a run-based residual. If it was a network show that moved over to basic cable, you're going to get a pooled residual based on a percentage of the license. So if the license is a 6-year license and it's paid every quarter for 4 years, you'd see a residuals payment quarterly for 4 years. Then it might continue to air for the last 2 years. You wouldn't see any other residuals, but the license is fully paid. So it's not directly tied to runs, it's tied to the revenue attached to the distribution. So those are the two types. The gross receipts-based residual is much more common. That's the sum total of all the residuals formulas for theatrical. TV has both. All right, so let's look at when and where the fixed residuals come into play, because these are the ones that are easier from a performer's perspective to keep track of. So you have network prime time. This is any made under the television agreement. So if it's made for network, made for syndication, made for basic cable, when it reruns in network prime time, you're going to get a residual that's based on your total compensation up to what we call a network primetime ceiling. So if you are a day player, you're going to get the day rate, and you worked for scale, you would get the day rate every single time it reruns in network prime time. If you are a series performer or an overscale performer whose compensation exceeds the ceiling, and these ceilings are set based on the dates of the photography of the episode and the length of the episode. So we have a half-hour ceiling, a 1 hour ceiling, etc. If your compensation exceeds that, you'll get the ceiling. Network, syndication, and foreign free are a percentage of scale. So and it's based on time worked or guaranteed. We call it total applicable minimum. So if you work, let's say you're hired on a weekly contract, and it's a half-hour show, so they could work you 5 days. Even if you only have to report for 2 days, you're on a weekly contract, so your applicable minimum is the weekly rate. If you're a day player, you're guaranteed 1 day, you end up working 2. Your applicable minimum is 2 days. And then the syndication residuals are percentage of scale. It's a decreasing amount each time it reruns. And then foreign free is also a percentage of scale. It's a little tricky, this one, because initial exhibition gets you a fixed residual, but then it's tied to grosses, and if the grosses get high enough, you'll get a gross receipts-based residual. And the way foreign free works, which is a little confusing sometimes from a performer perspective, foreign is outside of the US and Canada. So in television, Canada is considered domestic. A run in syndication gets a broadcast in every city across the US and Canada. That's what your residual will pay. In foreign, you're looking at aggregating licenses across all the territories. So when they license it to England, let's say they start in England, you'll get a fixed residuals payment based on the fact that it was released. And then you start tracking grosses. So when it gets released to Australia, and we're talking scripted dramatic, if it's a network code program, they sometimes do pay by area, but for the scripted dramatic, they're going to pay aggregating grosses. So when it gets released to Australia, you might not actually see any additional payment. They're going to have to aggregate a lot of grosses up from maybe a lot of territories, and then it'll switch. That's what we call foreign overages. So that's sort of a hybrid one, but am I being too confusing already? So continuing with fixed on television. If a television program has a theatrical exhibition, that'll be the same thing. You'll look at what your compensation was. It also has to be negotiated, so you might have some provision in your individual employment contract that talks about what you might get paid if it were to go to theatrical exhibition, but the minimums in the television agreement are a percentage of scale. And then same with internet streaming, you're going to get for the first, this also gets a little tricky. So for internet streaming of new television programs, they do have a little bit of a window. Depends on the type of program, how long it is, but there is an exhibition that can be ad-supported, free streaming, around the exhibition of the program on television. So you'll see residuals if you have streaming that's sort of on a continuous basis that's not happening around an exhibition on television. And in that case, if it happens in the first year, so the picture shows on TV, that's its premiere on the network, let's say, and they stream it for a longer period of time than just around the initial exhibition, you get a percentage of scale that covers 6 months. You would get another payment for the subsequent 6 months if they streamed it continuously for the first year. Then it switches to gross receipts based. The made for high budget subscription video on demand, which is the sort of newest addition to our contract as far as terms. Assuming it has to have a high enough budget and be at least 20 minutes long, then the way this residuals payment works is, first of all, your initial compensation will cover a year of exhibition. So if it's made for Netflix or made for Amazon Prime or, whatever other type of subscriber-based pay service for internet that might be out there. 1 year is covered by initial compensation. After that, you get a fixed residual. The way it works is sort of like prime time, but you only get a percentage of it. So you're going to start with your total actual compensation. If it hasn't reached the network primetime ceiling that would be applicable at the time for the length of the picture, so the half-hour ceiling or the 1 hour ceiling, then you would use your initial comp as the base for calculating the residual. If you exceed the threshold, you're at the threshold, right? So if I'm a day player, I'm starting with the day rate. And in year 2, I get a percentage for every subsequent year that it's available, I get a percentage of that. Or if I exceed the ceiling, then I would get a percentage of the ceiling every time. So those are the easy ones to actually do the math based on knowing how you were hired and what you were paid. The ones that, and here's an example. I thought this would be easier. So let's take a half-hour television program. If you worked for the day rate of $938 or you worked at the weekly rate of $3,255, these are obviously going to change. These amounts would change depending on the date that you're actually doing the work. And it reruns. So it reruns on CBS. That is a network rerun, and it runs at, let's say, 8 o'clock, so it's prime time. Under our contracts, there are 4 networks: ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, at least right now. I don't know how long that's been the case for a long time. But so when you hear people talk about the CW network or the Spike TV network or Disney, those are not actual networks under our contract. Those are either basic cable channels or they are syndication stations. A network is a very specific term. So CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox. And prime time is, I think everybody's pretty familiar with the timing of a prime time rerun. All right, so we're talking about a primetime rerun here. So the weekly rate is $3,255. The half-hour network primetime ceiling is $2,527. So the day player has not exceeded the ceiling. When it reruns at 8 p.m. on CBS, they'll get $938 every time it reruns. The weekly player whose initial comp has exceeded the ceiling is going to get $2,527 every time it reruns. So obviously scale and performers pay will change over time. The ceilings also change. When we negotiate rates, the ceilings are one of the things that get negotiated at the same time. But whatever the ceiling is that's applicable at the time of the principal photography is going to be the ceiling attached to that episode forever. It doesn't change when the rates change, right? Just like you sort of don't get retroactive pay when the rates, you get the ceilings are the same, even though the payments will come later. So let's say now it runs at 7 p.m. on a local channel. The CBS run was run 2, right? The initial exhibition is run 1. The network run was run 2. Now we're on run 3. So here I just did it as run 2, but in reality, if they really did come after, it would be run 3. So now you're going to get a percentage of scale. So the day player is going to get 30% of $938, and the weekly player is going to get 30% of $3,255. Now, it says when you're talking about a percentage of scale, you're actually using scale, which could be higher than the ceiling, but probably by the time you take a percentage, a syndication run's still going to be lower than a network rerun. So that's how fixed residuals work, but that's why I say that if you understand, based on how you were paid, you can actually do the math on those. So now let's talk about gross receipts-based residuals. These are less easy to calculate from an individual performer's standpoint, because what's going to happen is you'll look at revenue attached to a picture, and that is shared by the entire cast. So what you're seeing here is a schedule of the quarters. The quarters are calendar quarters, so the first quarter would be from January through the end of March. The companies then, at the close of the quarter, have 60 days to reconcile all their receipts and figure out, what money goes with what picture and who's in that picture and who should get paid, and, actually do the math and issue the checks to the cast and deliver them here to the union for processing. So they have 60 days to do that. So the first quarter would be due here by about May 31st. And then it can take anywhere from, how optimistic are we, Valery? A day to 60 days?
So I'm going to speak now. Just for a second, since I'm responsible for getting the checks out to all of you, our goal is to get the checks out on an average of 30 days. So there are highs and lows during given times in the year, especially on the quarters when we receive 400,000 or 500,000 checks at a time within a matter of days. But for the last 2 years, we've managed to be at 27 and 28 days on average, and our goal is to continue to stay under 30 days. And I'll throw it back to Jen.
So that's why you see a window there of, maybe immediately, maybe up to 60 days, but that, Valery just told you about but that's how it can be a little bit confusing when you get that first quarter payment and it's June. That's why, because the quarter ends and the companies need time to actually figure out what they're supposed to pay and then deliver it here, and then it gets processed and mailed to you. So like I said, these types of residuals are based on a percentage of distributors' gross. And the goal here, just like with the run-based or fixed residuals, is to tie the payment to you to how the picture is performing. So in a fixed scenario, you get that calculation based on a specific exhibition. Here, we're looking at source revenue to the extent that that's possible in every circumstance, and then costs are built into the formulas. So for example, let's say I'm a producer who I hire a sales agent to go put my picture into distribution, so they enter into an agreement with a distributor who then engages a sub-distributor who then licenses it to HBO. Your residuals are based on what HBO paid for the value of that picture in order to be able to show it on their channel. And then, so the formula, let's just be specific right now, is 3.6% of the value of that license. So whatever HBO paid, 3.6% of that is going to be shared amongst all the members, the principal performers in the cast, and that's inclusive of a contribution to pension and health. So if that seems weird or good, I don't know, either way. The reason why it works that way, so that you've got HBO paying a sub-distributor who's paying a distributor, who's paying an agent, who's paying a producer, and the producer is probably not getting 100% of the money that HBO paid. But there is a accounting for that in the formula. So the way the formula actually works, you would take 60% of what HBO paid to whomever they paid it to, and on that 60%, the residuals formula is 6%. We do it in one step because math is fun, and 6% of 60 is the same as, 6 times 6 is 3.6 if you do it in one step. So that's how the formulas work, which is why sometimes it seems a little confusing around, TV or home video, where you're looking at that source revenue. So like for home video, we're looking at the wholesale price. If we've got a studio, let's say, I don't know, pick whatever studio you want to, and they are distributing a picture on home video, we're starting with that wholesale price. There is a lot involved in getting a picture from, being on the screen to being on a Blu-ray in a store, and so you're going to take a percentage of the wholesale price and then a percentage of that to pay the cast. So it's built into the formula how the costs are dealt with. And then the performers share in that pool. So in my example of 3.6%, you're going to have all the performers getting a little piece of that, and a contribution to pension and health, or health and retirement, depending on what the appropriate plan is at the moment. They still haven't merged. We'll get there soon. That will be part of it as well. Some of the formulas are plus P&H. Most of them are inclusive, or H&R. Then most of them are inclusive. So there's a bunch of different ways we figure out what your share is. On a theatrical motion picture, it's what we call time and salary units. So if you're a day player, you get 1/5 of a unit for that day, and if you worked at scale, you get 1/5 of a unit for getting paid. If you're a weekly performer, you get 1 unit of time, 1 unit for pay if you worked at scale, and you max out on a theatrical motion picture after 5 weeks for time. So if I'm a day player and I work 1 day at scale, my time and salary units will be a total of 0.4 units. That's the smallest share you could have on a picture. If I am the star who works months and months and gets paid millions and millions of dollars, after 5 weeks, I'm capped out on my time units, and after getting the equivalent of 10 weeks of salary at scale, I'm done with salary units. So you have a range from 0.4 up to 15 units on a theatrical motion picture. And you have to aggregate everybody's units to get to the individual's pro rata share. On a television series, it's a little simpler. So if you've got made-for-network television series, it doesn't really matter how long anyone worked or what they were actually paid. You're going to look at how they were engaged. So you're either a day player, you could have worked 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, but you're either a day player, or you're a weekly performer. You could be weekly at scale, you could be major role, you could be, top of show, whatever. As long as you're a weekly performer, you are 2 units. So day players, 1 unit, weekly performers, 2 units, and a series performer is 3 units. So if you're on a series contract, then you're 3. So it's 3, 2, or 1 for that. And then on some of the network code shows, you've got it even more simpler. It's more simpler. It's 2 or 1. You're either a 2 or a 1. If you're a principal performer, that's an on-camera cast member, you're 2 units. And if you're maybe a singer or off camera, you'd be 1 unit. So that we have 3 different methods for doing pro rata share. Time and salary units and 3-2-1 are pretty common. Like I said, the network code shows, which have a generally smaller cast, are the only ones that use the 2-to-1. So let's do an example of that. So here we have, this is a completely made up picture, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibility either. The day performer, who, like I said, is at 0.4 units because they have that 1/5 unit for time and 1/5 unit for salary, and a weekly performer who worked for scale. So I have 1 time unit and 1 salary unit, so we're at 0.4 and 2. Now let's just say the total units for the whole entire cast, when you add up every single performer who worked on this picture, comes to 750. I don't know how many people that would take. It kind of depends on how many people are at 15, how big the cast is. We can have a big range, right? So if you have 10 people working on a picture and 8 of them worked 2 days and 2 of them worked 4 months, that's a very different makeup than if you had 10 performers on a picture and 8 of them worked 4 months and 2 of them worked 1 day. So even with the same size cast, your unit value can vary greatly. When you have a high budget, high action, lots of people on camera, you have stunt performers, you have singers, you have all sorts of people, loopers, dialogue, all sorts of stuff going on. These units can get up into pretty high numbers. So let's say this one, it's 750. And it's licensed to pay television for $5 million. So there's your formula. 5 million times 3.6% gets you to $180,000. That's your starting point. So that's what everybody's going to be sharing in. So our day player, you take the value of the unit, which you get to by doing 750 into 180,000, right? And they are going to get $96. And the weekly performer is going to get $480. Your check would actually be a little bit less than that because you're going to make a pension and health contribution. And so there'll be a little bit less that then would be your gross and obviously your net less. But so that's how it can work. Now, if we had 100 units, these numbers would be very different. But you know, that's sort of how this formula can shake out. And like I said, you change any of these numbers and the whole thing, it's a big ripple effect, right? So this, for folks who are on the webinar, probably they can see it more clearly. I think we handed out some of them in the room. It's a little chart so that you can see on the left-hand side are what the picture's made for, and across the top, different types of exhibition. And it's really just to sort of show how the vast majority of the residuals formulas are tied to revenue, as opposed to being fixed. The fixed is really only in the television exhibition of television pictures. Otherwise, we're talking about that gross receipts-based formula, which again is not tied to a specific run. It's tied to payments around a type of availability or distribution. All right, so on to Valery.
Thank you, Jen. So the real question is, why do we process residuals? Thank you. My department's goal is to make sure that we get residuals to all of you in a timely manner. So that's the bottom line. That's what we do on a daily basis. We want to make sure you're paid. We want to make sure that you're paid correctly. That the studios are providing the money that they say they're paying, and we use the data for negotiation. So let's move along. Oh, okay. Okay, so the purpose of the residuals processing department is pretty simple. We bring checks in from the studios and we put them in an envelope and we mail them out to you. So it seems like a pretty simple process, and in theory it is. What we've done is we've broken it out into some pieces just to let you know it's not quite as simple as it sounds. These are the 8 steps that we'll talk about. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about them. There's probably another 20 steps that my team goes through on a daily basis just to make sure we're sending the checks to the right people. But these are some of the more important ones. So step 1 is delivery. So as everyone understands, we receive boxes of checks. So the union does not cut these checks for you. They're issued by Fox, by Sony, by Warner Brothers, Disney. So every time you receive a check, you receive our statement to let you know what you're paid for, but the check is actually coming from the studio. So just to show you, that's how they come. They come in small boxes, big boxes, they come in envelopes, carrier pigeon, what have you. This is where we start. We date stamp the boxes. We open them, we organize them to make sure that we have what the studios say they have, or what we should have. And this is what it looks like when we actually organize everything. And we have we call this our check closet, and we have batches and batches of checks. If you can make out on the picture, we have the date, the number of batches, and by studio. So we have Fox, we have Universal, Entertainment Partners, because they're a big payroll house. So this is what we start with. We start with the batches and ready to be processed. Step 3, we capture the data. We receive either electronic data on what is being paid, or we receive paper. Okay, if we receive electronic data, that goes in, that goes into our system. We ingest that information and load it and match it to the checks. Again, if all the checks are out of paper, so someone manually has to key in a lot of the check information in order for us to create a statement. We also try to scan a lot of the checks through some high-speed scanners, and when we do that, that makes our job a little easier, but then we still have to make corrections from the data capture that we receive. And if the studios don't send us electronic files, someone actually physically has to enter each payment information into the system in order for you to understand what you're being paid for. So there's a variety of ways that the data comes in, a variety of ways we enter it and capture it, but it's all done at the same time. That information is, so if we have electronic data or manual data, we load that into our system, we type it in, we load it through various files, and we audit that to make sure the information matches. Then that's loaded again into our database. We use an Oracle database, and we try to match the checks to the data. So it's the information is entered independently. Checks go in on one side, the data for the checks goes into another side. We make sure that information matches. And then we loaded it into our Oracle database to make sure everything matches up, and we actually connect not just the checks and the data, but you to the payment. And again, we go through another QA process to make sure that that information is correct and that we have the right information for you. If we're missing performers because they're new, if we're missing productions because they're new, at step 6, that's when we enter a lot of that information and go through another edit process. And once that is loaded, if you're familiar with the residual tracker, that's when the information goes into the tracker and we have a mail date for you because we've validated the dollar amounts are correct, the payment amounts are correct, and we're ready to mail the check to you. And once we set a mail date, we can now generate a statement. So the statements are generated by us. We have to match the statements to the checks. And the way we do that is with this fancy machine. So there's actually 2 of these. They're both about 24 feet long. We load the checks that are pre-printed checks. They're already made out to you into one of the bins. We run special software that creates the statement for you, your individual statement. There are 2 cameras in each of these machines. The cameras read the check number. They also read the check on the check. They read the check number on the statement. And if they match, they merge them together and they run through. And if you can see on the far right, there, it looks like there's like a little harmonica, not a harmonica, an accordion in the corner. That's actually a finished set of checks and statements. That's how they come out ready to be mailed. So that's the completed process right there. And we run these all day long, every day, both machines, in order to get the checks that we receive out to you. The last step in getting the checks in the mail is actually putting them into an envelope. And we processed 3.5 million checks last year, just over 3.5 million the previous year, so we can't do it by hand. So we have a special Pitney Bowes machine that folds the checks, folds the statements, runs them through a postage meter, and then spits them out and ready for mail. So if I can have someone just play the MP4 for me, I'll give you a look at the machine itself. Oops, nope. Technical difficulties.
Isn't everything touch screen nowadays?
So what you see is, I'll wait. Okay, thank you. So what you saw was, at the beginning, those just paper and checks. So statements and checks, they get rolled into a machine, folded, like I said, and then inserted into envelopes. And again, that runs at about 10,000 pieces an hour. And we need that much speed in order to keep up with the volume of checks that we receive. And then that mail gets delivered to a mail house twice a day and out to you. There we go. So our process is simple, but there's a lot of complexity to it. We have a lot of studios that we deal with. They provide us data in different manners, different formats. We have to kind of aggregate all that and create one simple process. There are a lot of different markets and payment types that we receive that we have to manage. A lot of members, a lot of different, we have loan outs, we have individual payees, we have money going into trust, we have money going to various other areas, so we have to manage that. And the payments themselves, there's a huge number of them. This is an example for you of some of the paper data that we receive from the studios. So out of this information, we have to enter the pertinent information into our database to make sure that you're getting paid correctly and that you're getting the right information on your statements. And Jen's team uses these statements, these schedules as well to make sure that the payments are done correctly. So you can see it's not quite as cut and dry as the statement that you're used to receiving. Here's a bar graph of historically of what is coming into the union for distribution. In 2006, it was just over 1.5 million checks. In 2013 and 14, we're creeping up at 3.5 million, and again in 2015, 3.5 million checks passed through our doors. So it's a lot of paper, and it's a lot of effort to get each of these checks out. So one thing that I get a lot of questions about is like, what do I need to do as a performer to make sure I get my checks? As really, there's one thing: keep your address current. I don't know how to ask you any easier than make sure your address, if you're moving, let us know. You can change your address on the website, you can send us a fax, you can send us an email with an address update, but whatever you do, make sure you keep your address updated, that way we know where to send the checks. Just a screenshot of our website, under union info, there's contact information for residuals. You'll have contact information for Jen's team, for my team, and you can do everything through most things through the website. So it's a valuable resource for everyone.
So where Valery was just showing on the website where it has the residuals part highlighted, if you go to the contact section of it, there are actual links to emails and to forms. So if you want to click on a certain form, the website is very, we've tried to make it at least as helpful as possible with automatic links and phone numbers and emails so that you can just go there and click and get the form you need or get the email address started, or there are phone numbers as well. All right, so I think, are we on to questions?
Yeah, we're open for questions, and I think we'll start by reading some of the questions that came through email.
All right, so we have some to start with, and then I think we'll get more from the room. I'll start. So this question was, how are scale film residuals decided? Is it by size of role, days worked, billing, etc.? So I think that was in the presentation. You either are getting a fixed residual where it is based on how you were paid or the number of days you worked, or that is helping to determine your pro rata share, how you were hired. So you've got the two different methods, either time and salary units, a pro rata share type of a circumstance, or a fixed residual, which is looking at how you were paid or how you were engaged and what scale would have been for the way you were engaged. So this says, I recently had a supporting role in a big franchise tentpole movie. I worked for 3 days, and I'm curious how residuals get divided, e.g. streaming, DVD, etc. So I'm not sure if this was talking again about pro rata share or talking about about the way it gets distributed. So let's assume the latter, and that would mean the revenue is going to be tied to the type of availability. So in the reporting that Valery showed a screenshot of, you've got the companies reporting, you know, a certain amount of revenue in pay television, a certain amount of revenue in free television, a certain amount of revenue for electronic sell-through, for home video, for all the different types of availability. It gets broken out. When new media when it actually was new, sometimes that wasn't really, that level of detail wasn't necessarily delivered to the companies. That is not really the case anymore. So any way that they get information as far as how their pictures are getting distributed and where the revenue is coming from, the obligation in the agreement is to specify that when they report to us so that we see all the different types of availability and the revenue attached to it.
I'll jump on this one while you're reading. So I have a question from Darren. It was an email. It's a long question, so I'll read it out to you. Could we have a can we move over to an accrual system where smaller amounts accumulate for larger payments, or electronic bank deposit limiting the paper waste and mail, or opt to donate to charity like SAG-AFTRA Foundation? So there's few questions here. So I'm going to answer the direct deposit question first because this question comes up all the time. Actually, all three of these questions come up all the time. We are working on a direct deposit solution. We've been working on it for years, but the reality is that we're very close to getting something that's real accomplished, and we've been working on it for the last 2 years with an external company, and our goal is to provide or offer direct deposit to you. There are a lot of factors involved in getting that done, including getting the studios on board and the payroll houses, but we have some other interesting solutions that we hope that we can roll out, and we're actively working on that right now. The question about holding on to residuals or batching them, when I showed you the picture of the check closet, each of those trays is dated and they're from a specific studio, and we work on a batch at a time. It would be a Herculean task for us to start pulling the penny checks that you're familiar with or the 10-cent checks and then putting them aside again and then trying to figure out how to mail them, because one thing that you're all aware of is that the studios don't maintain your address information. That is one of the other reasons why we're generating a statement with your address. It's a one-stop shop. We take everything, we funnel it into our computer system, and so we're able to mail out the checks that you're getting. So as much as we would like to save on postage and bundle these smaller checks, it would create a lot more havoc than it would save. Finally, the checks could go stale. There's, this is your payroll, this is your money, and for some people, a dollar may not make a lot of difference, but for others, a dollar is a dollar, and they want their money as quickly as possible. So, again, ultimately, our goal is to get all the checks to you within 30 days, and we encourage you, and then Jen's going to jump in right now. If you're getting a penny check, please cash it. If you're getting a 10-cent check, please cash it. Wait till if you need to wait for a few days before you go to the bank, or for a week, or for a couple of weeks, that's great, because the studio will try to reissue that check again and again. So cash your checks, please.
Right, yeah, I mean, under the terms of our agreement, regardless of what the formula is, it's an obligation to you, and especially nowadays where we have, pictures that were out of distribution for maybe decades, and now it's sort of a volume business in certain types of availability. So the formulas are what they are. Sometimes that generates a small payment, but it's good if the companies feel like you're interested in actually getting that payment regardless of the size, right? Okay, so let's see. When it comes to enforcement agreements, what actual paper does the union have, and what steps does it take to obtain monies owed a member by signatory? And then this person goes on to saying they were owed for a fitting and for commercial. So a fitting isn't part of a residuals payment type of obligation, and commercials. Any questions about residuals for commercials. Our commercials department handles that. So, and those residuals for commercials are mailed directly to performers. It's a completely different system with a different type of formula, so there isn't the same obligation under the agreements for residuals for commercials to come through the union. So questions about that should be directed to the commercials department. But I can still say that regarding the paper that we have, it varies greatly. So where we have what we call a qualified distributor, which would be a major studio that you know, the ones we know and love, Disney, Sony, Warner, Universal, I don't want to leave anybody out. We've had decades and decades of relationship with those companies. We're pretty sure they're fairly stable and going to be around still for quite some time to come. So we have a little bit less paperwork than we would for a company who is sort of a single purpose LLC. We don't really know who they are. So it can range greatly, but we do have paperwork, documentation of some sort for every picture that you might have worked on and or will work on in the future. It'll range from either just a one-page information sheet from a studio to volumes and volumes of paperwork, from an adherence letter to maybe guarantees, assumption agreements, intercreditor agreements, maybe even all the way to we're party to a collection account or we've taken a residuals reserve. It just kind of depends on the circumstances of the picture and what we feel our relationship is with the producer who's coming in to sign up a project. So I should be setting these down so I don't, yeah, you can glance through. Oh, so here's, what is the time schedule in terms of after a rerun or foreign showing has aired? Are they paid quarterly? Does the time frame matter depending on the type of production? When would you expect to receive them? Do you recommend we put our residuals through your, oh, and then this is again going back to commercials. So, or is it, and then it also says, or should we track them ourselves? So that touches on a couple things. The timing for when fixed residuals payments would be due varies. So if it's a network primetime rerun, it's due in 30 days. If it's any other type of rerun, for the most part, it's due 4 months after the air date. In foreign, there's a little bit of a movable window, let's just say. The residuals are due 30 days after initial exhibition in foreign, any foreign free television. But there's language in our contract that talks about, or in no event later than 6 months, because, you know, especially back decades ago when that language was first written in, the producer had to actually be noticed at the point when that exhibition started happening. So there's a little bit of flexibility, but it'll be anywhere from 30 days to 6 months after it starts airing in foreign, when the residuals should be coming here. And then as far as keeping track yourself, we do have several monitoring services that we use to try to keep track of television exhibitions all around the world on any given day on many, many, many channels, as well as supplemental types of availability on the internet, DVD, all the rest of it. But of course, if you have a vested interest in a particular picture and you're keeping track of when it's available and you see that it's started to air on a, let's say, like a pay television channel, and 6 months go by and you don't see anything that's been processed for you, by all means reach out. There are many, many, many television and theatrical and new media pictures out there. We are doing our best to keep track of all of them, but obviously your assistance is also appreciated, and it actually will benefit your fellow cast members, because other than a cast list omission, which is a circumstance where a company makes a residuals payment on a picture and for whatever reason somebody gets left off, and that does happen from time to time. But other than that, we're filing claims to essentially recover payment for the entire cast. So how we find out that information can vary, but when we send out the letter, it says, hey, company, you have released this to, basic cable, and we haven't seen any payments come in, and you need to get that current, and we'll collect for that whole entire cast. So it's not a circumstance where our claim letter is going to say, and it's not automatically a claim. Sometimes we just make a phone call. These things can be easy to not so easy. But obviously, assistance in helping us track down money that's due to you, we're always happy to have the help. Do you have another one there?
Okay, here's a question. What if you're paid under your legal name, but your SAG-AFTRA member name is different? So we have plenty of people that have different names, believe it or not. And we base the payment on your social security number as well as your name. And we enter AKAs or professional names and legal names into our system, so we keep track of that as well. So it really shouldn't be an issue. If you think it's an issue, I would suggest you contact the residuals department, or if you think you're missing a residual for some reason that you should have been paid. Sometimes, if the studios don't have the correct social, we would create a new record, and if there's not a valid address, the money would be placed in our trust account. So I would encourage all of you, again, if you check our website, we have a residual tracker that you can track what's in the system, what's been mailed. We also have information about funds in trust, so you can look up by name, by your last name, first name, and see if there's any money in trust for you. And again, contact the trust department, and they will give you instructions on how to release the money if it does belong to you.
Okay, I think I'm going to combine these two because they're sort of related. It says, if a producer has a clear pattern of not paying actors' residuals over several films, can SAG-AFTRA prevent them from making films? Particularly relates to various low-budget agreements. And then the other is, does SAG-AFTRA really have any power to get residuals paid from TV series and made-for-TV movies? I have been waiting on claims submitted on a mini series and that went to cable. So yes and no for both of these. We obviously have a claims process, but how successful we are or how quickly things get resolved can vary greatly depending on the nature of the dispute and the parties involved. And as far as let's say a circumstance where we know a producer's a problem, they come to the door, they want to make another picture, whether we can decide not to let that happen. In certain circumstances, absolutely that can be the case. But the union is always weighing the cost benefit to you, right? So if it's a low budget picture and the likelihood is we think we might have some trouble when it comes to, if it gets distribution outside of theaters, collecting residuals for you. We'll try to take some measures to help make that easier down the road. Like I said, everything from a guarantee to, for a party that we know is going to actually have some funds at the point when that happens, to a distributor's assumption agreement, so that at the point when they actually get distribution, we have the party that's actually collecting all that revenue who would be making the payments, all the way up to a residuals reserve, which is essentially we take an open account that is meant to cover the cost of the residuals that will come along later. So there are any number of ways we can try to protect the obligation that we think will arise in the future around distribution that would trigger residuals. But sometimes we're also trying to make a judgment call around the opportunity for work versus the risk later on for residuals that will be very difficult to collect for you. Particularly on the lower budget pictures, sometimes these are vehicles for up and coming actors to get some exposure, to get experience, to put together a resume, to earn initial compensation, right? I mean, that at least we're pretty confident is going to get paid. They'll shut the picture down if payrolls start to not happen during production. So we do want to allow people as many opportunities as possible to work, to put together, you know, that experience, that exposure, to, you know, essentially have your acting career. And if that means a little bit of risk from difficulty that might be to collect residuals, like I said, it's a sort of a balancing act. We try to, like I said, take other measures to protect that downstream obligation while still allowing members to do the work and earn the initial compensation, which is obviously critical towards, you know, health coverage, pension, and all the rest of it. So we're trying to be as creative as we can to, in those circumstances, allow the work to happen, but also do everything we can to protect the residuals obligation. And, you know, worst case scenario, we file a claim, we file a demand for arbitration, and we get them in front of an arbitrator, and we, you know, have an award that we need to get collected. So we have any number of options on that front.
For actors that are just starting out to get a union job, and this specifically actually talks about commercials as well, they haven't been required to join. Is there a way for them to track residuals? So we have a residual tracker, I just mentioned it, and depending on your union status, you should be able to have access to the residual tracker as long as you have your SAG-AFTRA ID. And if you don't, you can contact the membership department and they'll verify your identity and provide that for you. You will create an login on our website and you should be able to access the residual tracker and see what's happening. As far as commercial residuals are concerned, they're sent directly to you. We don't process them in the union. So if you believe you're owed residuals because you've seen reruns of your commercials, you should contact the commercials department and have them investigate for you.
Okay, so I was in an ultra-low budget movie that is about to have a 1,500 theater theatrical release. Will I receive residuals for the money it makes in theaters? How do ultra-low budget residuals get paid? So no, no residuals for the theatrical exhibition. Even the low budget agreements work exactly the same. It's a theatrical picture, so the theatrical release is what your initial compensation covered, and residuals would only be triggered if it then moved somewhere outside of theaters to a supplemental type of availability on the internet or television or Blu-ray, home video, that sort of thing. Why don't shows on, say, Netflix generate residuals? If there is a product and it gets sold and money comes in attached to it, shouldn't that money be passed on to those who would normally get residuals? So this, I'm not certain what picture this question is attached to. On the Made for New Media agreement, that the lower budget pictures, let's say. So I'm going to assume this person worked on a Made for New Media show that was not under the current new high budget terms. Because, like I said, under the high budget terms, you've got scale for the performers, you've got all sorts of terms around that, and initial compensation covers a year of availability. On the older Made for New Media agreements, it was similar to theatrical type of availability. So your initial compensation, whatever they paid, whatever the company paid you in initial compensation, covered all availability in new media for streaming, and it could also maybe cover all availability in the paid new media markets if the budget didn't reach a certain threshold. So let's say, which was pretty common. So if the picture didn't have a budget that worked out to $25,000 per minute, then there wouldn't be residuals for new media availability. So like I said, similar to how your initial compensation on a theatrical picture covers theatrical availability in perpetuity, that was also the case and still is the case on some of the made for new media agreements. Like I said, they're like television. It's sort of a moving, depending on the type of availability and what the budget is. Initial compensation is going to cover different periods of time and different types of availability. But assuming this person was working on a made for new media where initial compensation covers availability in new media, that is why there wouldn't be residuals being paid, and there wouldn't be residuals unless it goes somewhere else. So it'd have to have some sort of television exhibition or a actual, like a disc availability, not just a download to own or download to rent or streaming availability. Shuffling cards. So this one says, why do residuals for cable airings go lower and lower the more they air? This could mean, again, two different types of availability. If it's a made for basic cable, it does go lower. It's a different percentage of scale as you move through more reruns. So the first rerun is going to be 17% of scale, and you'll sort of move through a range of a decreasing percentage per rerun down to the point where you get to 1.5% of scale, and it stays there, and that's what you get from then on. That's sort of a carryover from the idea that, the initial exhibition pays you more, and as you move through the license value, the value that the company is receiving for that continued availability, they're getting a little less money, so you get a little less money. It would be a similar case, like I said, the example I just gave of the run-based residual is if it's made for basic cable, but it could be a similar circumstance if it's a theatrical picture or a made for network show that's going to basic cable, and that first license is likely to be for a higher value than at the point when they have a second time or a third time, So as the revenue goes down, the residuals will follow suit. More for me? I have an animated series that has been running 3 times daily on Disney and Disney Junior since November. When can I expect residuals? So November, December, January, February, March, 4 months would mean the payments are due just about now. It'll take a little while to process. So that we're right on track. So they should, this is Barry. Hopefully your payments are either already received and in the processing department or soon will be, and be mailed to you sometime in the next day to 60 days. If that doesn't end up being the case, you can contact my department and we'll look into whether there's some sort of advance payment of your residuals. That might mean it'll be a little longer before you see something, or whether the company is delinquent, in which case we will reach out to try to remedy that.
We're working on the quarter right now, if you guys noticed on Jen's slide. So I think we received, this was the 4th quarter checks. We received close to 600,000, 550,000 checks, and we're well on our way through the quarter. So we hope that we'll be under 30 days for this quarter and continuing on. So expect checks in a timely manner.
All right. Is it possible that a certain television show will re-air just of I think maybe just some of its episodes or some of the episodes more than others, and therefore we would get a different amount in residuals for each episode. That is certainly possible. If you're talking about reruns, you might have a circumstance where if it's a brand new series and they're trying to find an audience, maybe they will have that first exhibition of that first episode, and maybe they'll rerun it again within, a couple weeks, and then air it again later. Whereas once the series is established, you're sort of into maybe towards the end of the season, they might not rerun those episodes quite as frequently, or maybe they do a Christmas episode, and so that doesn't show up quite as often as some of the others. It's absolutely the case. It could certainly happen. There is some logic to how things are made available, but not total logic. You could also have a circumstance if it's, let's say, a electronic sell-through type of a circumstance. So maybe you're in, I don't know, a very popular dramatic series, right? And it's available, let's say, on Amazon. And one particular episode, somebody that a whole bunch of teenage girls is really infatuated with, maybe that gets purchased a whole bunch of times, and you would see, higher revenue for that particular episode as opposed to other ones. There could be any number of reasons why you might get one episode that has, for whatever reason, more exhibition or higher revenue attached to it than others. For the most part, television series are kind of licensed, and they live together as a season at least, if not a whole entire series, but there certainly can be exceptions to that. All right, this next one, I'm not sure it's concerning commercials. Again, I'm just not gonna, I'm sorry to Mark. I do not have expertise in commercials, so I would just suggest again that anyone who has questions about commercials, contact that department. I recently worked on the Divergent series, Allegiant, for 2 days as a day player. How are residuals calculated for DVD sales, iMovie downloads, Netflix? So assuming this person assuming it was for scale, you would be in the time and salary circumstance. So you would be a 0.8 performer out of the whole entire cast. Off the top of my head, I don't actually know how big the cast is. But for home video, for DVD, the residuals formula is 4.5% of distributors' gross receipts up to their first $1 million and 5.4% thereafter. So you're just going to get your pro rata share of that percentage of grosses. For iMovie downloads, I think that's what we would also call electronic sell-through, download to own. It is a similar formula. It starts, but it goes based on units. So you're going to take 20% of whatever the site is that is making it available. So whether that's iTunes or Amazon.com or whatever it might be, wherever those downloads are coming from, you're going to start with am I going to remember this? I brought a cheat sheet. You're going to start, I actually just remembered, you're going to start with 5.4% of distributors' gross receipts for the first 50,000 units, and then it goes to 9.25. I should have looked after all. For units above that, as much as I'm pretty familiar with how all of this works, I don't necessarily have every single bit of it in my head all the time. We look at the book all the time to make sure we're getting it right. Unfortunately, I don't quite have 100% of it. Yeah, 9.75. Okay. Oh, and then Netflix, that was the other question. So Netflix, I assume we mean online subscriber availability. That's the 3.6% of distributors' gross receipts for that. Could you please explain how you get a negative deduction on free TV? Okay, so this might be referring to what sometimes we call recoupment. And it would be probably attached to a gross receipts-based formula. So I'll give you an example. There could be any number of reasons why a recoupment could be triggered. So let's say a company sends out a whole bunch of home video units, or they enter into a license agreement, and let's say some of those home video units get shipped back. They've paid residuals. They try to be good as far as estimating what's actually going to get sold and what's not going to come back. They'll take a little bit of a reserve to try to cover that. Nobody likes to be in the red, neither the companies nor the performers. But let's say more returns come back than they anticipated, and they had paid residuals. That could mean now you've essentially been overpaid, because if they made a residuals payment based on thinking they sold 1 million home video units, and then it turns out 100,000 of them came back, now you've essentially been overpaid for about 100,000 units, and until that gets sort of worked out back to even, you'll see a negative. Or let's say maybe they entered into a license agreement for television, and partway through, I don't know, the company, the distributor, the exhibitor defaulted on the license, or it got canceled for some reason. Maybe it was in a foreign territory. There can be any number of reasons why that could happen, but it would again have to be tied to something specific happening. The other example in the fixed residual circumstance could be if a program was scheduled to air and then for whatever reason didn't. Usually they'll make up the run. So let's say it's a network primetime show and they got preempted because the president decided to make a speech at that time. Generally, rather than having it be recouped, they'll make up the run somehow. They'll air it to make sure that it happens. But let's say it just doesn't happen, and because that residuals payment's due within 30 days, maybe they've already sent the check, then the run doesn't happen. So that could be another reason for free TV why you would see a negative, because essentially anytime you see a negative, really what that is saying is that you got paid a residuals payment that now, for whatever reason, the actual performance of the picture doesn't cover what you got paid. There's one other circumstance where that can happen, and that is what I mentioned earlier, the cast list omission circumstance. So if you are paid a gross receipts-based residual based on the company thinking 100 people with whatever their units work out to are in the cast, and then either they realize or we bring to their attention the fact that, hey, you had 15 singers who you should have paid along, or you had stunt performers, or whatever the case may be. Now, instead of 100 people, they should have paid 110 people. And so they have to reallocate the money because now some of the money that was paid to you really should have gone to these other performers. So you'll see a negative for you until they get back to the gross is actually matching what you've already been paid. If you shot a film and your scene is cut, do you still get residuals? No. So the way the theatrical agreement works, and as this is similar for the scripted dramatic type of programming, it could be a circumstance where some of the network code shows don't quite work the same way. It's based on whether you worked as opposed to who's in the final edit. But the dramatic programs and theatrical motion pictures, they pay the performers whose performance ends up in the version that's released. So that can mean different things depending on the type of performance you have and the type of picture it is. So you might have different people, for example, getting paid for the pay TV version of a picture as opposed to the free TV version. You could have, like, so if the only scene I'm in is not fit for network broadcast, I might be edited out. If I'm the person who was hired to loop those swear words, I would be included in the residuals that are paid for that free TV broadcast, but not when my performance isn't used in the pay TV version. If I'm in a deleted scene that never is anywhere except on the Blu-ray with all sorts of bonus material, then I would only be getting residuals for that availability. Maybe the most interesting one is if you're in an animated picture, your entire performance is your voice. So many times the cartoons, animated pictures are going to show in other territories, even if it's a foreign language territory, they might still show it in English. But in a circumstance where, let's say I'm in a cartoon, and when it shows in Mexico, they've dubbed out all of the English-speaking performers, and now it's all in Spanish language performers. I wouldn't get a residuals payment when my voice is removed. We've had a number of conversations with companies that can be tricky for them. We've got circumstances where they dub the speaking parts, but the dog is still barking, or whatever the case may be. So you can have different people getting included in different types of availability depending on if their performance remains. And I would encourage you as members to be kind to your fellow performers, because in these gross receipts based formulas, if you're edited out and the company is still paying you residuals, that might feel really good to you, but know that the payment that you're getting is actually coming out of the pockets of your fellow castmates. It is not a circumstance where the producer is having to pay extra money. They're 3.6% is the residuals pool, and it's a matter of who it's shared between. So the companies are paying 3.6% regardless of whether they're paying 5 people or 500 people. I think that can be tricky because, everybody wants to get their residuals payment, everybody wants to get their contributions, but the plans do not look kindly on the concept of somebody improperly qualifying based on earnings that weren't really for them. So you don't want to run afoul of that. And again, it's also, you need to consider your castmates, because that's the money, that's how the money gets divided up. So. I don't know if we shuffled the cards. I'm sorry if we missed any questions.
Yeah, I think we tried to sort through in similar questions and go through the similar questions. We're good?
All right, so thank you very much
Thank you.
for having us.